Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining Ten2Two today for our business webinar on things to consider when employing part-time or flexibly. As experts in flexible and part-time recruitment and consulting, we have a wealth of experience in this area, and we'd like to share some of this with you today. And we will follow up with the slides for you afterwards, so no need to be writing too much down at the moment. I'm Jane O'Gorman, Director of Ten2Two and your co-host for today. And I will be keeping an eye out for any questions that you may have over the course of the session, and you can pop these in the Q&A below. Now, we only have 30 minutes for the webinar, plus added time for questions. So without further ado, I would like to hand you over to my co-director, John O'Sullivan, to kickstart the presentation. John, over to you.
Lovely, thank you, Jane. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this lovely autumn day today. Just really to kick off, before we go through the agenda, this is such a broad area now. And particularly since lockdown, we've seen flexible working featuring in many, many businesses. And so what we're going to do is we're going to sort of touch on some of the key points around the different aspects of flexible working. But what I really want this lunchtime session to do, its purpose is to just sort of make you think again or provoke a thought about, you know, what you might do or what you might do better or what you might change. And I think when we're busy managers and busy running businesses, I think there's always, it's always nice to be able to spend a couple of minutes just reflecting on what we should be doing rather than just sticking to our daily agenda. So looking at the agenda quickly, we're going to talk about the context a little bit, and then we're going to talk about three areas: recruiting and onboarding, flexible staff, managing people who are working flexibly, so managing the individuals, how to manage the team that's working flexibly. So there's a couple of different characteristics there when you're thinking about the whole team. And then we'll summarize, and as Jane said, there's a Q&A. And whilst we have experience of, you know, helping organizations recruit thousands of flexible workers during the 15 years that we've been going, what we have recently done is we've reached out to a number of our clients in the sort of small, medium enterprise sector, just to understand what their recent experiences are and what their recommendations will be. So you see a few of them on the slide there, and there were more. And actually, there's been some really interesting insights that's come back from them. And as we go through the slides today, you'll see some of their comments and some of their recommendations, as well as some bullet points from us. But I think as we're focusing on small and medium enterprises today, I think it's a slight difference between, or maybe a large difference between SMEs and their bigger counterparts. And everything is like SMEs, it's like it's got like a magnifying glass on it. You know, things seem to have bigger impact. So, you know, from a productivity point of view, if you're in a smaller business with 30, 40, 50 people, or even less than that, everyone's contribution has to count. So, you know, if somebody isn't working out, if somebody's not being engaged right or being deployed right, you really feel it in a smaller business. And on a bigger scale, even the sensitivity around the business is, you know, if you have a loyal member of staff that leaves and has been with you for a while, is a high contributor, you lose them and you feel the impact of them very quickly. And equally, bringing a new person on that's very effective can transform a business. So in a large organization, you know, they bring maybe hundreds of people in and out of an organization every week. You don't really see that happening on a day-to-day basis. But with a smaller organization, that is exaggerated. Transparency in terms of its fairness to the quality across the team is very evident. You know, if I'm unfair to one of my team members in a big organization, most of the staff in the organization don't recognize it. But in a small business, if somebody's being treated unfairly, or if somebody is being treated in a more advantageous way to you, it's very evident. So you've got to be very careful about being fair and being very equal. Equally, an organization is very agile. So if you've done something that you need to change, you can just change it very quickly which is one of the great things about a small organization. And finally, I think what's very important now culturally is that many people work for smaller organizations because they have a real purpose. You can make a change yourselves, and you can see a real sense of belonging in the teams that work for smaller organizations. And that's a tremendous plus point for SMEs. However, what we've seen from a flexible working perspective is that the pandemic in particular has thrown up some really significant recruitment and staff retention challenges for SMEs. I picked out a couple of stats here. There are many that are, some of you will be seeing them in the news and the business press regularly. But just a couple, 76% of employees more likely to apply for a role if there's an option to work flexibly. And we're seeing candidates' expectations increasing month on month since the pandemic in terms of having some flexibility in the role. And if there isn't any flexibility, then many candidates are just dropping out of searches very, very quickly. And then another telling stat there is of the 52% of employees who'd rather work for a bigger corporation said that they will put off working for SMEs because of the lack of flexibility. And some of that is perception, some of that is practice. So it's very important for SMEs to compete in this marketplace. As we see from the ONS stats on the left-hand side, it's a very tight marketplace right now. Many, many job vacancies and more jobs than there are unemployed. So that means you have to be a very positive, a very attractive employer to bring the right people into your organization. So really just to kick off our exploration of the flexible working structure, I've just put a quote here from Fiona Mason, who actually has put this in a very positive light. She said, what I like about the current situation is that the flexibility that is being requested now and offered applies to both men and women. So when we started Ten2Two, it was definitely a women's issue. People with flexibility, it was mothers returning to the workplace, it was mothers wanting more flexibility, but the pandemic has sort of changed all that. And we think that's a really positive aspect, and is something that organizations need to accept, that this is now a permanent aspect of the workplace. And therefore, if organizations are employing flexible working strategies, they need to think about how can improve them, how they change them, and how they adapt them in the long term. It's incredibly important. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go through the areas that I spoke about before, about designing a role, about recruiting and onboarding, managing individuals, and managing teams. So first of all, if we look at incorporating flexibility into a role, and I think there's a couple of things here. Some of our clients talked about actually the flexibility has to have a balance. So whilst people have been encouraged to find flexibility in the jobs that they're offering, the jobs that are being performed within their organization, it's got to work for everybody. So, it has to work for the employee because obviously that they have a balance to find in their own lives. It's got to work for the business. You have to protect your productivity. You have to protect your customer experience that you're offering. And it has to work for the whole team. So you can't bring in something that's going to disrupt the working practice without adapting to what's going on. So really importantly, that balance needs to be found. So it's not all I have to deliver flexibility. You've got to deliver the right type of flexibility that works for you. And as somebody said on the left-hand side, focus on the skills, experience, and values of the role and individual. The desire to work from home is a secondary detail. So it complements, it shapes the role. It's not the role itself. However, we do believe, and we've seen this across many different types of roles, that flexibility across whether it's part-time, whether it's a compressed hour or 4 days a week, working from home, a hybrid role, it should be considered when designing and changing. Nearly every role can have some form of flexibility involved in it. So I think sometimes, Wayne, it's very easy to think this role has been performed in a particular way for some time, and it isn't flexible. Actually, could there be some flexibility in it? And there's all sorts of help online about different flexible working options. Indeed, there's a guide on the Ten2Two website about the different types of flexibility you can employ. But I think it's very important when you're designing a role is to sit back and think about, is there flexibility in this role? Jane, put your hand up.
I have indeed put my hand up. Just a quick question coming through, if I can interject there, John. Great points in flexibility. Just a quick question. How can I introduce flexibility if we don't have it today?
So I think there's a couple of ways you can do that, Jane. I think it's in terms of bringing it into the company when it's not done. The first thing to do is to talk to the team and to just talk to them informally about, if flexibility was introduced into the company, what type of flexibility would they like? Whilst there is a huge focus on work from home and hybrid, many people still like going into an office and working in an office environment. So what you can't do is jump to conclusions, say, hey, we're going to get rid of our office and everyone will work from home. That doesn't work for young employees. It doesn't work for people who find their energy from others, extrovert people. So you have to talk to your employees first about what that might mean. You have to look at your customers and look at what your customer requirements are and the operational demands of the business, and then apply some of the working formats to those findings. So it's a bit of research first, a bit of analysis on what you're doing, and then look at the roles and see how that works. And just go through, if you're a small business, an informal consultation with the team to say, we're looking at introducing a couple of different working patterns, and we'd like to try some. The idea of doing a pilot or a test is really good before you go down the road and fully implement something. And generally, everyone gets behind that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks, John. Useful, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. There's three main aspects that I've picked out today on interviewing and selecting flexible candidates. And they start with the sort of functional side of, many interviews that we're setting up now are being done over video. And that's both time pressures, the fact that it can be done now, particularly on first round. So you may do two sets of interviews. You may do one, which is very much around online, and a second one where you want to bring somebody in face to face. What we need to be very careful about is that the interview techniques that you follow and the structure of the interview doesn't exclude people who might be very applicable for the role. So you've got to think about the specific conditions if you're interviewing over video. Maybe think about having several people interviewing, maybe having colleagues involved. Think about the formats, whether you're asking people to present. You've got to think about the different interpersonal relationship that you build when you're on video. It's very different than when you're bringing somebody into an office, getting them a cup of tea, sitting down at a table. You've done all that informal bit before you get into then asking questions. So you've got to sort of try and create that when you're doing that. So we have a guide on interviewing over video, and there's some very specific things in there you should always consider when you're doing it. The second one then is actually selling the role. And you'll see there on the right-hand side, the quote at the top on, highlighting the work-life balance, being very positive about the culture that you're building in your organization, and how in a flexible organization, you're keeping people connected, feeling engaged. Because there are many organizations with many people, if people are working from home or if it's hybrid and everybody is working remotely, it's very easy to get a sense of isolation when you're not actually with a team and you don't have strong team interactions. If you've been building your skills there, promote it, talk to people about what you're doing, and show them that they're coming into a very progressive work environment. And then the third thing I'll just pull out today is just this idea of soft skills. And for those of you who have done competency interviews before, where you're essentially asking skill-based questions in a very structured way to candidates, quite often that was very functional. Tell me a time when you've done this. Explain your experience in this particular area, so whether it's finance or marketing. But actually now when we're in a much more agile environment where it might be remote working, it might be some people in the office, some people at home on different days of the week, or people part-time, you've got to think about the skills people have around how they communicate, the empathy they have for the people around them, how they make themselves understood and communicated, how they want to build a sense of team around them and contribute to a team, and then their own personal organization skills. So I found in the last couple of weeks myself, it's been tested, because what I'm now seeing again is clients saying, let's meet up, John, rather than let's do it on video. And my diary now is, I'm forgetting to put travel time in. So all of a sudden we're asked to just do back-to-back videos. Now I've got an hour into London and an hour back. And haven't quite got to grips with that. And that's something that I'm challenging myself on right now. So we've got to think about those organization skills, and people working part-time in particular on handing over work, on making sure they're very communicative is vitally important. So as you see there on that middle comment on the left-hand side, concentrate on the communication skills. They're great at their job, but cannot communicate. Working from home or flexible working is really hard. So once again, think about that when you're interviewing, selecting. And then what you have to do then is carry that through to that really critical first couple of days and weeks in the office. And this, many organizations call it onboarding now. It's that induction that you have when people walk in. My daughter has just, left university this year. Today's her first day in her proper real job. And she walked into London, or got trained to London, with a telephone number to ring her manager when she got there. She was highly nervous, and she's worked before and she's been at university. And most people are, they sense of expectations they have of the role, and the sense of what people's expectations of them are going to be, means that those first couple of weeks are critical. So not only is it vital to get people up and running as quickly as you can to make them productive, but also if that is a poor experience at the beginning, it takes a long time to recover from it for any particular candidate. So if somebody is working from home or working remotely, many organizations are creating like an exceptional initial period. So saying to somebody, we'd love you in the office for the first week or two, or we'd like to get you in for, a team meeting on the first week and meet a couple of key people. So whether it's a day, whether it's a couple of days of the first month or the first week, is actually saying, I'm going to step outside of what may be your traditional working pattern. I'd love you to come on this time. Get that agreed at a very early stage. And actually people want that. They want to feel part of the team very early. You've got to think of the technology they need. If they work from home and you say you haven't got your laptop ready for a week, that's not good. If their logins haven't been set up on Teams or Slack or whatever communication device you use, you've got new employees who can't talk to their colleagues on the first day. So that's got to be ready now. Whereas before, you could get somebody and say, sit in the office, read some papers, we'll get your laptop to you later. Doesn't quite work now when people are working remotely. So try and be prepared, be ready early. And then also think about the team itself and the impact of the new employee on the working patterns they're going to have. So prepare the team, tell them about how the person's going to be working, and just talk to them about, okay, if somebody's working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or they're going to be in the office on a Thursday and Friday, do you have core days that works with the team? Are there particular people that are very critical to the new employee, and the new employee is critical to them? So are you syncing up the days that they might be working together, or syncing up their availability? So you need to think in advance about not just the needs of the person, but the needs of the team as well. The key thing here for onboarding was communications, and making sure that that communications period is absolutely intensive in that first period. But once again, that just flows through to everything. Managing flexible people, you need to, if you see on the right-hand side, regular frequent check-ins are a priority. And, you need to treat people who are working remotely or part-time as equal to what this particular client called the static office workers. So you're not excluding them. We've known people who are working Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday, but the team meeting is on a Friday. That doesn't work for people who are not around on that particular day. So once again, you have to sync out. So when you're managing people, is have those conversations, have regular one-to-ones, and talk about the working patterns and the impact it's having on people. Create some boundaries. So those boundaries are going to be for both the organization and for the people. So for example, if you are working at home, when are you going to sign off? When are you going to stop looking at your emails? Making sure that people's well-being and mental health have been looked after. But equally, if somebody is at home and they're going to go out for lunch, they're popping out for a sandwich, you can't see that because they're not in an office environment. So put that in your diary, out for half an hour, or go onto Teams or Slack or whatever you're using, saying, I'm popping out, or I'm grabbing a breath of fresh air, just so everybody knows it's very transparent what's going on. I think one of the key things here also is absolute effective performance management. You know, in days gone by, people say, I know they're doing a good job because I can see them at their desks. But actually now, having a team that's being very agile and with the economic environment we have, setting goals for people where they are measurable, where they understand the goals and what's expected of them, and they are time-bound and they're very clear, is vital across the whole team. If you have a good set of goals for every member of the team, and let's say everyone has 3 or 4 goals at any one particular time, you know that when you collect those all together, everybody's making that difference. Provide people with feedback on their progression against those goals. Talk to them about whether they're doing a good job. Talk to them about where they might need to develop, and do that through check-ins. So that might be something where you say, I'm going to talk to you every week at this time, or I'm going to talk to you every fortnight at this particular time, and you get them scheduled. That's great, but also don't forget that people might need that informal communication with you as well. They might be worried about something. They might need to have a bit of a brainstorm about a particular issue that they have. So make sure that as a manager that you're available. And Louise Towler, one of our clients, talks about she's on Teams every day for half an hour. She just sits there and everyone knows she's there. And if they need anything, they just reach out to her and she has a call with them. So making sure that that's in there as well. And then also the other thing that we find from a flexible working environment is that there's often a focus on the work. So the informal disappears a little bit. You get on a video call, you get straight into what we're talking about and you get down to it. Where you don't have the, how are you today? How was your journey into the office? Were you affected by the train today? That type of thing. So make sure there's room for the informal time, but also make sure there's room for personal development and people's progression. So they don't feel they're sitting there doing a job, churning out the work, but without thinking that they're personally developing in their role. So make sure that you're allowing time in your schedule with people who are working flexibly, in fact, all employees, to have that discussion on development. And the final area, oh, Jane.
Yeah, sorry, John, just a quick question on that come through. So in terms of bringing people together and thinking about the team, how do I bring the team together if they're never in the office? So if we have a fully remote element, how do we do that and how do we bring that together?
Yeah, it's a really good point. We've seen some really interesting things being done. Something that I was involved in all the way through lockdown with an organisation where they used to have a weekend wind down on a Friday, for example. So, 4 o'clock, and it was an informal, unless you've got a client thing going on or operational needs. We sorted down tools at 4 o'clock. Everybody got on a video. Everyone talked about their high and low for the week. What's worked for you, what have you achieved, and then what's upset you, what have you found frustrating. And it was just that way of everyone having a chat, everyone seeing each other, being more informal. It was a really lovely way to leave the week. I've also seen some really interesting tools being used. So, what people find is that when you're working on screen and there's a group of you working remotely, being creative can be quite difficult. And the functional stuff is okay, meetings are okay, but when you're trying to do idea generation or thinking through problems and problem solving, it can be a challenge. But there's some tools out there that help that now. There's something called Miro, M-I-R-O, which is there's a free version of the tool, and it has whiteboarding on there. People can put their yellow sticky charts on there. You can build tables next to it. It's a really wonderful tool to facilitate a group of people collaborating in different ways. And I think, you have to think about how do we build in the informal and how do we support collaboration, which is really the majority of times when teams are together. I also encourage people to talk informally. So if you look at our Teams chat every morning, everyone comes on, says, good morning. So everyone's sort of checking in with each other every day. They're saying, I'm really feeling awful today. I might need some help on a couple of calls, whatever that might be. So it's that informality of constantly checking in and over-communicating. So
thanks for that, John.
That leads on nicely into my final slide on management. One of our clients called it open communications, clear instruction, empathy, and kindness. I couldn't describe it better myself. We always talk about poor communications. People don't communicate enough. We never over communicate. People always talk about too few communications in organizations. So I think just there is always a sense of, am I communicating enough? Are we communicating enough? Are we in contact enough? And then seeing that as being your benchmark is better. And as you just asked, Jane, facilitating common time together and informal time between colleagues. And then also from a team perspective, doing a couple of things. So having team goals, what are we doing as an organization? What are we trying to achieve? How are we performing as an organization? That brings people together when they know that as a group, they're either performing, they may be under pressure, it happens all the time. How do we problem solve our way out of that? Providing that structure and direction. And then allowing time for that to be fixed. So I think there's this sense of facilitating time, providing a formal structure around that, around goals and KPIs and metrics so people understand the environment they're working in, means that flexibility and location just disappears. We've seen there on the left-hand side, a couple of comments around file sharing solutions like Microsoft Teams, people talking about daily catch-ups. And, whilst people talk about a daily catch-up, it does seem onerous on people. But when you're on Teams or Slack, it's really easy. How's things today? Do you need to talk about anything at all? It takes a minute to do that. And you've made that connection. And there's some great research from Gallup. Most people know Gallup as a very credible research organization. And they talk about employees' sense of engagement with the company. And their chart shows that the more engagement and feedback that an employee has with their manager, the more engaged they are in their business. And if it is, I talk to my manager once or twice a month, people just don't feel engaged. If they have an informal daily check-in, they feel very connected. So I think that's one of the most important things around managing teams, is making yourself available as a manager, connecting the teams together, and providing the structure around it. I'm going to finish close to the end here now with just some thoughts about the sort of formality around flexible working. And in many days gone by, flexible working was often, in particularly small organisations, often on a very informal basis, and indeed, it will continue to be so. But as you see the quote on the left-hand side, flexible working practices should be supported by deliberate processes and policies to bring transparency, clarity, consistency, and fairness to the organisation. And I've jotted down a couple on the right-hand side there. Flexible working policy doesn't need to be 100 pages. It just needs to be the ground rules that you're working on. What are the things that you believe people are doing? If there is, you have a certain number of hours in a week, if there are core days that you're creating where you want people in the office, there's a policy there that there's lots of examples online that you should do, just so people know where they stand and the company and the employees are working on a common footing. The other one then is operating processes, which I think is vital, is to capture your best practices about how you work together. So if you are saying, okay, we're going to have a weekend wind down on a Friday at 4, we're going to have a weekly check-in with the team, there's going to be a bi-weekly or a weekly check-in with each employee. Start to work out, is that working? Let's put that down, capture it, communicate it to everybody, and then get their feedback on it. Here's our processes for flexible working. Is it working for you? Is it creating any issues or barriers in the organisation? And how can we change that? Employment contracts will often talk about days and hours of work. They're stated in there. It may state the place of work, and you may need to review those. You may need to talk to your HR advisor if you don't have somebody in the house about whether any flexible working that you brought in needs to be stated in employment contracts. And don't forget that if you don't practice flexible working right now, people have the option and the right to request flexible working from you formally, and you have to follow that procedure. So once again, that is available online. If you just search on flexible working requests, then you'll see a whole range of guidance on the process you follow to consider whether somebody can work flexibly and how they can work flexibly. So I'm going to finish with just one quote from Nicola Lloyd at CPS, where she said, "Lead, don't manage. Share the highs, learn from the lows, listen and praise." And when I read that, it just made me think, when flexible working in all the formats and all the volume that we have now, it really doesn't require anything different than, as a group of managers and business owners, we've always had to do. You always have to manage your people well. You have to think of managing the people and not just the work. It's a really common error that managers make, particularly inexperienced managers, is when they're thinking about the output and not the people and the development. And actually, if you are communicating, if you are structuring the team in an effective way and bringing them together, then flexibility can work well. So nothing's really changed from before. You just have to do more of it. So thank you for listening. That's the end of my run through. So we're going to share some of these slides. So I haven't read everything out, but certainly, have a read of them. If there's anything you want to come back with us on, then I'm happy to follow up with you, or Jane will do as well. Now, our contact details are there. Jane, in the minutes we have remaining, were any further questions from the attendees on the webinar today?
We've got a couple, John. One particular question that's come through. What do we do? Great, obviously, in terms of all the flexibility. We know we know that it's a different climate now. We know things have changed. But what do we do if some of our roles can't be flexible?
I think there's always a debate about whether a role cannot be flexible, whether there is always a very strict 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, or very strict shift pattern. So even on, I ran a travel business with over 600 people in it, with loads of consultants, and we had everyone on shifts, and we had to have the phones covered, but we have flexibility around scheduling. So if somebody said, actually, half of our team had children, others were working for charities and things. So we would always try and be flexible around schedules, as long as everyone understood that if we couldn't be flexible, we couldn't. So we'd always try and be that. So I think there's generally an option. I think there are some roles where the level of flexibility you can offer is less than normal. So if you have people in the field and that are out and about, if you have people who are on the phone in a retail environment, then things like working from home, it's just not possible. You need people face-to-face with customers. But when you think about the flexibility you have where it might be able to fit in with their lives better, and think about the different options that are out there, and say whether that is that you change schedules, whether that is you do job share, as an example, where you can have one role that isn't flexible split into two. And actually, in some of the job shares that we've done before, Jane, you will remember, we've had two people with complementary skill sets bringing a whole lot more skills to a role than one individual might have brought. So I think there is what we always talk with clients about is to think again. Think about the flexibility you might employ, and if you're struggling, step back from it, come back and think about some of the other formats. So, but what I wouldn't say is that every flexible working format should fit every job. I think there are challenges indeed in fitting flexibility in. And once again, if it works for one role in your company, doesn't work so well for another role in the company, you have to be transparent about that. You have to say that for some people we can do this, others we can do that. And I think generally people are accepting of that type of structure.
Yeah, thank you, John. I agree. One other thing, we're just talking when you touched on engagement, communication, and particularly when someone's coming on board and managing flexible workers, how important or valuable is it to have a mentor or buddy in that situation?
Indeed, You know, I think in whether it's flexible or not, Jane, I think, you know, having somebody who, for example, might be working the same days as you're working, or might be in the office the same days that you're in the office, and that can really accelerate your onboarding, I think is really good. So you've got somebody there who knows the business very well, knows the process and procedures very well. But also, I think if you buddy up with somebody, you very quickly establish the first personal relationship, and that's always a nice thing to have. So it's good for the employees because they are helping bringing new people, fresh blood into the organisation, and supporting their new colleagues. But also for a new employee, they know that they've immediately got somebody to go to. So you often see, for example, in internship programs, graduate programs, and things like that, you will have a buddy allocated to a new employee. We've done returnship programs where people are returning from a career break, and we know that employers have allocated a buddy to them. So I think if they've got somebody early on, I think you can get through any inconsistencies that might come from the fact that people are working only, you know, a certain number of hours a week, or in the office, or available some times during the week. So no, I think it's a really good idea, and it's definitely worth considering.
Thanks, John. And just one other, in terms of formalising flexible working arrangements versus informal. And if we have an informal flexible working arrangement, is there value in making it a more formal structure? Does that make the business more attractive?
I think there's a couple of quick aspects here, just to cover it in the last few minutes we have. I think there is, in terms of continuity, I think people's sense of security. I mean, if there's 2 or 3 of you working in an organisation, then generally it's always informal. You know, there is that level of dependency you have on each other, the familiarity you have. But when you get up to a small and medium enterprise of 30, 40, 50 people, which is at that point where, you know, we always talk about, you know, your business is getting larger when you walk into the office, or you go into reception and there's somebody there that you don't know, or you don't know them very well. I think if you are still working formally, people feel the risk is that could change, and that managers could change, and therefore it's going to disrupt them. I think if there's, you know, informal flex working is very good when it might be temporary, for example, or it might be something that you're testing. But I think just having, you know, some form of agreement in a policy and with a person which says, you know, we have agreed now that we're going to do this, we will review it in 3 months' time. You may have to look at how formal that wording needs to be. It doesn't need to be an employment contract always. Certainly, I think when you're thinking about variations to employment contract, you should always do your research on this and talk to your HR advisor, certainly on it. But there are different ways of making something a little bit more certain and formal, rather than just leaving things as, you know, as a verbal agreement which can change at any time.
Thank you, John. That's great. I think that's it for now. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we will be sharing slides afterwards, so do look out for those. And if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or John, or book some time in our video calendars, and we'll be very happy to catch up with you. Thanks so much for again for everyone coming on board today, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you, John.
Yes, thank you, Jane, and thank you everyone for your time today. Just to re-emphasise, if anyone does have any questions, just drop us a line, and we're happy to help. Have a good afternoon.